In Ecuador, presidential candidate Fernando Villavicencio was killed after a rally in the northern center of Quito. A group of fire assassins shot the presidential candidate as it was concluding the political rally. A Lisbon district court orders return to Venezuela $1.5 billion withheld in Portugal. Niger's military junta accused France of trying to destabilize the country and violating its closed airspace. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Ana Brosabal from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Ecuador, presidential candidate Fernando Villavicencio was killed. The attack took place at the campaign rally of presidential candidate Fernando Villavicencio, who was murdered by hired assassins. The candidate for the Construye movement was holding a rally in the Coliseum of School between Gaspar Villarroel and Amazonas Avenue, in the north of Quito. It is also reported that several people attending the event were wounded. Fernando Villavicencio was among the four favorite candidates for the presidency. Lisbon district court orders to return to Venezuela $1.5 billion withheld in Portugal. The judgment establishes the order for the Novo Bank to return the financial resource to the Venezuelan government led by the President Nicolás Maduro. The court declares the judicial appeal well-founded and accordingly orders the Portuguese bank to reimburse money in the Venezuelan holding accounts. The measure responds to a series of demands made by the government for the Novo Bank, one of more than 50 international banks that withholds state money, to return the appeal. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Venezuela, Ivan Gil, stated on his Twitter account that Venezuela wins trial and regains control of assets in Portugal. Moreover, he added that this is a result of long work and, above all, of the resistance of the Venezuelan people, and the government of Nicolás Maduro will not give in to the threats of imperialism and the coup regime. The fourth Amazon Summit ended this Wednesday in Brazil with the participation of presidents and head of delegation from the 8 countries of the region and guests from Asia and Africa. The participants in the environmental event released a joint communique of the forest developing country with 10 central axes of that should be the environmental policy to follow. The participants recognized the paramount contributions of indigenous people and local communities, reaffirmed their commitment to preservation of forests, and called for reducing deforestation and forest degradation. The statement also pointed out that climate change is already affecting tropical forests around the world and that international cooperation is the most effective way to reduce environmental damage. The bloc Amazon bloc countries made an appeal to developing countries to exercise a greater influence on the management of resources intended for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. President of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, in an intervention during the working meeting of the second day of the Amazonian Summit, noted that throughout the events, a very positive dialogue has been materialized between the 8 nations that make up the region.
Here's the last 4 days. The summit started actually on Saturday. And throughout the summit, we were able to establish an excellent dialogue between the 8 countries.
Esta sociedad ha demostrado una capacidad y una competencia extraordinarias de discutir los temas amazónicos. Además, quiero referirme al hecho
I would
extraordinario
also
de
like to
haber
highlight
reunido a los presidentes de Sudamérica,
the importance of the fact that we have here reunited the heads of state of the main countries who are bordering the Amazonas.
Lula advised that measures must be taken to care not only for the Amazon but also for the world among all countries.
To create a set of measures to protect not only the biggest green area in the world but the rest of the forest throughout the world. What we have accomplished here in this summit are only a few steps, but we need to keep working and we need to keep investigating and joining forces in effort to be able to solve the current crisis.
On Wednesday, in his closing remarks at the fourth meeting of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva vowed to protect the rights of the indigenous people living in the Amazon area by all necessary means.
We need to take into account that one of the most precious areas that we have here in Brazil is where the indigenous people live, and that's why we take into account their thoughts and concerns. We are going to take all the necessary measures to protect the environment, even if that includes the military police, in order to achieve this. This would represent a great challenge, taking into account that this is not a small territory, it's quite big, so it would take a lot of effort from authorities and professionals. We also need, and we are working very hard on this, we are trying to expel criminal bands from the Amazonic area.
During his press conference, Brazilian Foreign Minister Mauro Vieira highlighted the relevance of the summit, which included the presence and support of important sectors of the civil society.
I would also like to add that this conference is of great importance and relevance because of the level of participation. That is why I said it has been one of the most important presidential summits within the ACTO, because there was as well an unprecedented presence from members of the civil society. Those who were here have seen that from Friday to Sunday, talks were held with the civil society, the Amazonian talks, which were very intense and very representative, very numerous, with over 400 events and series of plenaries. Today, 6 representatives, one from each area, presented their report from their talks to the ACTO heads of the states.
Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, while you find news in different formats, new dates, and more. Other studies coming up, stay with us. Welcome back. Russia announced that Polish authorities plan to create a Polish-Ukrainian unit to push ahead with the occupation of western Ukraine. During a Security Council meeting, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said Warsaw seeks to use resources of the Western country, which are indirectly confronting Russia. The Russian military chief stressed that Poland has become the main instrument of the United States' anti-Russian policy and has declared its intention of creating the most powerful army in Europe. Shoigu also reiterated the accusations against the United States for supporting the plan to supply weapons to Kiev with an increasingly lethal arsenal.
Willingness to invest a significant portion of available resources in Ukraine in order to turn the situation on the battlefield in its favor creates serious risk of further escalation of the conflict. Threats to the military security of the Russian Federation have multiplied in the western and northwestern strategic directions. A serious destabilizing factor is the ascension of Finland and, in the long term, Sweden to NATO. In the context of the growing shortage of ammunition for Western-style artillery systems in the Ukrainian armed forces, Washington has committed a war crime by including in the aid package cluster munitions, which are prohibited by international conventions. In addition, NATO countries are actively considering the transfer of F-16 tactical fighter jets to Kyiv.
In northern China, the torrential rains that hit in recent days killed at least 62 people, tripling the number killed in Beijing alone in a week. Typhoon Doksuri, which caused widespread damage in part of China last week, was downgraded to a storm after hitting neighboring Philippines. Beijing and the neighboring province of Hebei were particularly hard hit, with Beijing experiencing the heaviest rainfall in 140 years. The death toll from the storms rose to at least 33, with 18 missing in Beijing alone. As devastating storms also hit northern China near Russia and North Korea. Beijing's Deputy Mayor Xia Limao expressed in a press conference his deepest condolences, and he also called for remaining silent for the victims. On Wednesday, China has earmarked 1 billion yuan, about $130 million to offset losses in areas in the Hai River basin inundated recently for flood storage purposes. The Hai River basin suffered floods caused by rainstorm, drought, and Typhoon Doksuri in recent days, and in national flood storage areas located in Tianjin, Hebei, and Henan, respectively, were put into use. The minister said that about 1.85 billion cubic meters of water were stored, alleviating the pressure of flood control in downstream areas. The fund will go toward compensating property losses of residents living in these areas, including damage to crops, animal and poultry farms, commercial forests, houses, and agricultural machinery to help them produce reduction and live as soon as possible. In Bangladesh, at least 19 people died due to the flooding and landslide caused by heavy rains. According to reports, more than 1 million people were affected by the rainfalls. Chittagong Division's Commissioner Office spokeswoman Nilufa Yasmin confirmed that 5 people are still missing while 6 others were injured. Meanwhile, the authorities opened some 2,234 shelters in the city while the army is participating in rescue operations. Wildfire fanned by hurricane's force winds prompted evacuations in the area of the Hawaii archipelago early Wednesday, forcing some residents to jump into the Pacific Ocean to escape the smokes and flames. The state's Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke told the press that evacuations in the island of Maui were underway, but that she did not yet have a definite number of people who must leave their homes. On the other hand, U.S. Army Major General Kenneth Hara told local news outlets that people were jumping into the water to avoid the flames. Coast Guard authorities have reported the rescue of 12 people off Luhaya coast and said other vessels were heading for Maui. The fires were caused by dry conditions and strong winds from Hurricane Dora, which is south of Hawaii, but not expected to make landfall. The United Nations organization urged Iraq to take preventive and mitigation measures against climate change, drought, and the high levels of environmental pollution. The UN High Commissioner in Iraq, Volker Turk, said that the Iraqi authorities will take action against climate change. He also described Iraq's environmental degradation as a toxic mix of violence, oil industry excesses, global warming, reduced rainfall, and lack of effective water regulation and management. The Iraqi government recently announced that the lowest water levels ever recorded in the world.
Rising temperatures plus the drought and the fact that even the loss of biodiversity is a daily reality, and it's really a wake-up call for the country but also for the world, because when we look into the situation of these communities, we look into our own future. The global era of the era of global boiling has started, and I think here we can live it and see it on a daily basis. And that's a very strong appeal on my part to the Iraqi authorities to make sure that environmental defenders are included, that they are listened to, that they can share data. That
we have a second short break coming up, but before we invite you to visit our YouTube channel at teleSUR English. There you'll be able to rewatch our interviews, top stories, special broadcastings, and more. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. Final short break, don't go away. Welcome back. Niger's military junta accused France of trying to destabilize the country and violating its closed airspace. The accusations were read out in state television Wednesday by the junta spokesperson, Colonel Major Amadou Abdamane, who said the French forces had attacked a National Guard post, freeing people he said were terrorist prisoners.
Serious events underway in Niger as a result of the behavior of the French forces on our territory and their accomplices. Today, 9 August 2023, at around 6:30 a.m., the Niger National Guard position at Barku, 30 kilometers from the Samira gold mining site, came under attack. The number of casualties has not yet been established. However, as a reminder, through direct communication with Western partners, the behavior of the French forces was criticized for having unilaterally released captured terrorist prisoners. They have been grouped together in a valley in the village of Itili, Zimbabwe, 28 kilometers northwest of Yatakala, where a planning meeting had been held with the aim of attacking military positions in the tri-border area. The 16 liberated terrorist leaders were apprehended in 3 operations, including 2 on Niger territory on 16 June 2023 at Jesse, 38 kilometers from Bankilare, leading to the arrest of 3 terrorists. On 16 June 2023 at Makarma, leading to the arrest of 5 terrorists. On 7 July 2023 at Tina Disan, 15 kilometers west of Aurara, 45 kilometers northwest of Ayuru, in Malian territory, leading to the arrest of 9 terrorists. These acts reinforce our analysis of the situation, but beyond that, since the seizure of power by the CNSP, with a view to a new security approach, we are witnessing a veritable plan to destabilize our country. These security disorders planned by these French forces, as was the case in Mali and Burkina Faso, aim to discredit the CNSP and create a break with the people who supported in its action to create a feeling of generalized insecurity.
The Ethiopian army announced that they took control in the 2 main cities of the Amhara region after fighting with Fano militants during the last 4 days. According to statements by local residents, the situation is currently calm and peaceful, and no shots had been heard in the streets. Citizens assure that although there is no militia presence in the city of Bahir Dar, the defense forces continue to tour the city with tanks and other military vehicles. On his part, Save the Children organization called on Wednesday for the continuation of humanitarian aid access to families and children in Amhara, victims of the later conflicts between the National Army and militia forces. On Wednesday in Zimbabwe, President Emerson Mnangagwa addressed thousands of supporters in the capital Harare in a speech laden with call for peace. The speech comes days after his supporters were accused of stoning an opposition activist to death, and human rights organizations questioned the credibility of the general election scheduled for August 23. Mnangagwa is seeking re-election and is facing a stern challenge from main opposition leader Nelson Chamisa, whom he narrowly beat in disputed polls in 2018. The opposition has accused him of relying on violence, intimidation, and institutions like the police and the courts to crack down on critical figures, ban opposition rallies, and prevent candidates from running. Zimbabwe has a record of violent and disruptive elections since 1980, when it attained independence from white minority rule following 1970s bloody guerrilla war. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad granted an interview to Sky News Arabia where he spoke about multiple issues, including the fight against terrorism, the civil war, and relations with Arab countries. Bashar al-Assad stated that terrorism is the reason for the destruction in Syria, and that those responsible are those who supported terrorism, attended the war, and planned it, not those who fought against terrorism. Referring to Israeli aggression in Syria territory and its true objective, President Bashar al-Assad expressed that the Syrian army is the main target. For the scenarios that were hatched in the region, President Assad said that the Syrian government was aware of the scenarios that were played and marketed in the media to create a state of terror. Finally, referring to the Western campaign to invade the country, the Syrian president stated that the target was not Gaddafi but Libya, and that it wasn't Saddam Hussein but Iraq, and that the target was not President Bashar but Syria. In relation to the possible meeting with Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Syrian leader said it was not used, as long as it is meant to be held under Erdogan's conditions.
Without condition means that there is no work agenda, and without a work agenda there's no preparation, and no preparation means no results. Why then should I meet Erdogan? To have soft drinks? We want to reach an obvious objective. Our objective is the withdrawal from Syrian land, whereas Erdogan's objective in meeting me is to legitimize the Turkish occupation in Syria. So for that reason we cannot meet under Erdogan's rules.
Regarding a dialogue with the U.S. government, these were his words.
Dialogue has been ongoing but always cut short, so we never had hope, not even for a second, that the Americans were going to change, because the Americans take, and don't give anything. This is the nature of the relationship with the Americans from 1974. 4 decades have passed and we haven't achieved anything with any administration. We don't have any hope, but our policy in Syria has always been to leave the door open to any attempt.
We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For teleSUR English, I'm Ana Rosabal. Thank you for watching.